Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to First Global's third STEM Talk and interview session that's part of the programming for the 2020 First Global Challenge, Connecting Communities. My name is Manisha Rajagata, and I'll be moderating today's talk. One important part of community is having the opportunity to learn with each other and from each other. We're hosting a variety of sessions throughout the season with interesting and inspiring individuals involved in STEM fields. That way we can discuss together, answer questions together, and learn together. Joining us today is someone who needs no introduction. Inventor, entrepreneur, STEM advocate, and the founder of First and First Global, Dean Kamen. Dean holds more than 1,000 US and foreign patents, many of which are for innovative medical devices that have expanded the frontiers of healthcare worldwide. As someone whose day job consists of using STEM to create solutions that change our world for the better, he knows firsthand how crucial it is to equip the next generation to do that at an even greater scale. First Global is just one answer to that call. And today we'll be learning more about Dean's vision and the importance of inspiring youth to the global changemakers we need.
It's always good to be here.
We're excited to have Dean with us today to discuss First Global and the importance of using the tools of STEM now more than ever to inspire the youth to tackle global challenges. So, Dean, teams submitted over 450 questions for this talk, but the most common question was about the inspiration behind First Global. How did it get started? Where did the idea for First Global come from?
So First Global, in a sense, is nothing more than the expansion or outgrowth of First. I started First here in New Hampshire more than 30 years ago. And when I saw the impact you could have almost instantly on kids, all different kinds of kids, all different backgrounds of kids, by giving them a set of common tools. Mathematics is the same for everybody. Physics is the same for everybody. Give them a problem statement and let them learn how to solve that problem, but almost more importantly, let them learn how to work with each other. I thought it would be scalable. And we almost instantly took First from a small room here in New Hampshire to what became First around the United States. And as I'm sure you know, we have thousands and thousands of teams and hundreds of regionals last year. Unfortunately, for the first time in 30 years, we had to cancel them this year. And championships that filled the Astrodome and filled Tiger Stadium. But probably 5 or 6 years ago, even though we had teams coming from 80 or 90 countries to this US-based thing called First, and by the way, most of our teams and most of our directors were excited to invite and embrace all these international participants, I looked at it and realized we're not growing fast enough around the world. If after 25 years back then, we still were in less than half the countries of the world, it seemed to me on the bright side, hey, without even trying, without even being officially international, we have half the countries. What if we put together a focused effort to bring all the great aspects of First, namely teamwork, cooperation, gracious professionalism? What if we could package them all up, but focus on planting a seed in every country in the world of a First team, at least one, and then have one team from every country in the world come together somewhere and get visibility and get them all together to focus the world on what happens when you get kids from every country and every culture, from every continent, in one place to celebrate the use of technology to solve common problems that the world faces. Wouldn't that seed planting dramatically accelerate the ability for First, the regular First, to grow such that it has hundreds of teams and thousands of teams and its own regionals and country championships around the world? And instead of taking the next 30 years to get the other half of those 200 countries, we should do it faster by focusing on this new little organization called First Global. Well, I'm happy to tell you that 3 years ago, we did the first demonstration of it in Washington, D.C., with a bunch of you there. And I thought we'd get 20 or 30 countries to each send me one team in this very much more Olympic style than the first style. And instead, we got well over 100 teams to cram into Constitution Hall. And it was spectacular. And it went so well right there in real time. We said, wait a minute, we got all these teams here. Before we close the event, let's announce we're going to do one next year. And I had Ricardo Salinas there, who has helped found this with us. And I put the microphone in his hand in Constitution Hall. And since we really didn't have it, we didn't have much, he just said, hey, everybody, this has been so exciting that our little new board of directors has agreed we're going to do it again next summer. And we're going to do it in Mexico. And he couldn't give more than that because we didn't have facts yet. But meanwhile, over the next couple of months, we organized to do it in Mexico City. And we didn't get 100 and some odd countries. We got something like 156 countries. It was fantastic. And then while we're in Mexico City, seeing this thing really grew, and it was really exciting. And we had one team from all these different countries, including one team that we all love to talk about now. It's a team that's not even from a country. We had Team Hope, these kids that lived in a refugee camp. They didn't have a country, but they have hope. So Team Hope showed up again, as they did in Washington. And so there we sat in Mexico and said, don't worry, everybody. We're going to do this again next year, and we want even more countries. And we spent a few months struggling to figure out where we could do this again and how to get enough support to do it again. But just last year, we did it again in 2019. And last year, we had 191 countries. And we held the spectacular event in Dubai, in the Middle East. And we had teams from all over the world, teams of kids that were hugging each other and supporting each other and celebrating with each other. These kids are way more open to change and to realizing that we're all more likely to win together than fight each other, because then we're all going to lose together. So I was inspired to do First Global because I knew, after seeing how well First is working everywhere we have it, I knew that it would be almost immoral, unethical, not to work as hard as we could to make First available all over the world. Because frankly, in some places in the world, there's even more of a desperate need for kids to have access to STEM and technology than, for instance, in some of the richer countries in Europe and in America. So I put this little group of people together and said, you know what we did with First 30 years ago? We're going to do it really fast. We're going to call it First Global. And as we plant seeds around the world and kids get exposed in First Global, then they'll grow teams. And those teams will end up becoming First, not First Global, but First. Each country might still always send one team to our First Global annual event, but countries, and by the way, over the last 3 years, many of the countries that had their first experience with First Global 3 years ago now have many teams in their country, all competing with each other, all wanting to be their country's representative to the next First Global event. But in the meantime, they're growing bigger organizations in there, including now First Lego League, First Tech Challenge, First Robotics, and then ultimately their First Global competitors. So the vision of using First Global to expand the growth of First and make it a truly global community is working really well, in part thanks to all of you. You guys have been fantastic at spreading the word. That little organization of a very, very small group of, I'll call them kids, but young professionals in Washington are fantastic. And with the help of some of my people up here, in New Hampshire, I think what First Global has done with a tiny group of people is nothing short of remarkable.
For sure. I mean, over 190 countries in 3 years, it's an incredible impact, especially like with such a small team, as you mentioned. Why do you think that was possible? And like, does it really help highlight the importance of STEM today globally?
So if the question is, how could such a small group of people create in less than 3 years this community that have one team from 191 different countries all come to celebrate. How can that be? I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, one of my favorite quotes is the anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of dedicated citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has." And what she meant was, big organizations are big. They're on top. They like the way things are. Big organizations that have the power to change don't have the reason to change. They're on top. It's always little struggling organizations that want to grow and want to change things, that want to improve things, that are the catalyst to change. So I think Margaret Mead got that right. But why was this tiny group of people so capable of making this thing grow so well? I think two reasons. One is, with the first organization that they could tap into around this country and around the world that spent 30 years both creating the people and creating the culture of first, cooperation, gracious professionalism, the impact that they could demonstrate of teachers working with parents, working with corporate sponsors, with government people. We had a model that's beautifully scalable. But most of all, the real reason, the final reason it went so quickly is because I think kids around the world were already so open to it, were so hungry for it, were so thirsty to have knowledge that's accessible, especially knowledge in the STEM fields. If they could learn the basic science and the physics and the mathematics, and they could develop the tools of engineering, electrical and mechanical and systems, these kids with these tools have the capacity to address really critical, urgent global problems, whether it's clean water or food or cybersecurity or healthcare or you name it. I mean, global warming, I think appropriately, is on the mind of even kids already everywhere around the world. I think the power of technology to improve the world is something that kids just naturally embrace, frankly, more than older people now. So once you said first global will give to every kid that it touches some of these tools and some of the inspiration to use these tools to solve problems and connect these kids, it was a very easy sell. We have a very excited, receptive generation of kids around the world. And that's why First Global grew so quickly.
Amazing, truly. I definitely could see that in Dubai, and I'm definitely seeing it online now with the current season, the way that teams are still able to be engaged. It's really powerful the way that this community has kind of come together, especially during such a difficult time. We're facing such a horrible adversity with this pandemic, and to see that they're still motivated, they're still driven, it kind of really shows that everything you just said like absolutely holds true. No matter what the world throws at these students, they're there and they're ready, they're driven, they're excited. Speaking of our students, we actually do have some questions coming in from the different teams. Ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So from Team Kenya, how can the knowledge of STEM be used to foster creativity, ingenuity among youth, leading to innovation?
How can the tools of STEM foster imagination? It might be I might argue that it's the reverse of that. In fact, Albert Einstein famously said, imagination is more important than knowledge. I don't think we bring imagination to First Global. I think kids are born with imagination. It gets beat out of them by the time we're all adults. I think kids have more imagination and more curiosity than adults. What they don't have is the tools to take that great imagination, that great idea that's in their imagination, and turn it into reality. And if you can combine a great inspired idea with realistic tools, to make that idea come to be, that's success. And I think what First and First Global are trying to do is say to all of these kids that are imagining fantastic solutions to problems and are imagining a better world, we're saying to them, you need tools so that you can take those great ideas and make them a reality. Otherwise, they're just dreams. So I would say to that student, you bring your imagination, you bring your enthusiasm, you bring your vision of a future to the table. We'll bring you the tools to make it a reality.
I love that. I think you're definitely on the money there. We all have this innate curiosity, and it's just a matter of how do we leverage it to create a better solution. Definitely the tools. I like that a lot. Team Cambodia wants to know, what are the impacts of not learning STEM? So First Global and First really drives, STEM education and giving those resources, as we just mentioned, to students around the world. But what are the impacts of not getting that?
So I think a great question that adults, that government and political and corporate leaders should ask themselves is exactly that question from that student from Cambodia. What are the consequences if we don't get First and First Global into every community and accessible to every student? Because the lack of access to STEM is going to be a really big problem in the future. Even 100 years ago, you might choose to be an engineer or a scientist or a mathematician, but you might choose to be a farmer. You might choose to do lots of things. And many, in fact, most jobs until relatively recently did not particularly require any kind of background or understanding of science or technology or mathematics or computer code. But as we move at an accelerating rate into the future, all the jobs that didn't require sophisticated understanding are being done by machines, by robots, by computers. All the jobs that used to be manual labor a few hundred years ago went away when we started building steam engines and bulldozers. And that was good news. You didn't have to do back-breaking high labor with your muscles. You got to take advantage of bulldozers, of steam engines. That was the Industrial Revolution. Well, now we're coming through another revolution. And just like we eliminated the jobs that a ditch digger could do if he had a shovel, those jobs don't exist once you have bulldozers. Well, the jobs that used to be available to somebody before the age of computing and robotics, those jobs are going to go away as well. And you could be sad about that, or you could say, hey, the jobs that are going away are the ones like the ditch digger was way better off driving that bulldozer than trying to push those rocks by hand. Well, the jobs of tomorrow will be the jobs that we did away with, the boring work, the repetitive work, the non-exciting careers. So I would say to all of our leaders around the world, it's not only critical to give more kids, the STEM skills so that we can improve the future faster. We've got to make sure we give all kids access to these technologies, because the ones that don't have it won't even be able to have the jobs that they used to be able to get, because those jobs are going to go away. But for every one of those jobs that goes away, we're going to create multiple new jobs that are more exciting, that are better careers, but only for kids that have the resources and the talent and the expertise and the training to fill those jobs. So we see already the disruption that's happening in our culture between the haves and the have-nots and the inequities. The way you're going to get rid of those inequities is you're going to give all kids the same powerful tools so that they can all create a future for themselves. They can all become contributors to a better society, and they'll benefit and they'll take from that society the value they created. But if they don't have the tools to create value, and some other kids have better and better and better tools to create more value, It would be like giving a very small group of people bulldozers and leaving everybody else with a shovel. It's not going to be a sustainable way for these people to get along in a global community. So to your student who says, what do we do about the students that don't have access to STEM now? I would give a very, very high priority, whether it's a government program, an education program, you name it. I think we should have a global, urgent focus on making sure no kids have to grow up from here on in without access to a meaningful education that includes the ability to embrace science, technology, engineering, math, no matter whether they're boys, girls, rich countries, poor countries, developing countries, rural, city, it doesn't matter. The kids that will inherit this world are going to need to be comfortable with technology.
For sure. Speaking of careers and jobs, Team Turkmenistan would like to know, you have a lot of different inventions over the course of your career. The Segway, the Stirling engine, iBot, just to name a few. As an inventor, what invention are you most proud of?
You know, when people ask you a question like, which of the things I've done am I most proud of, I used to think that would be a hard question to answer. In the same way that you can't ask a parent, which is your favorite child, which one you love more. You know, you don't do that. Even if they had an answer, they wouldn't share it, right? But I have a very easy answer to the question, which of my inventions do I think is the most important? And it's a very easy and it's a truthful answer. Every one of them that was a product, as you pointed out, whether it's an iBot or an insulin pump for kids with diabetes, or, which, by the way, I made when I was the age of a lot of the kids on these first teams many years ago. But whether it's an iBot or a dialysis machine, it's a thing. It will have its place. It will be useful. And I hope, due to new technology, it will be made obsolete. And people will look at it at a museum someday and think, that was pretty crude stuff. So I don't think any of my actual specific products will be what I will remember as a great contribution that will endure. The mere fact that I believe so strongly that innovation is what drives every generation to have more and do better than the prior generation. If you believe in the power and the importance of invention, then what invention could be more important than the ability to make more inventors? It's like when you're a little kid and you're told, what if you could have only one wish? What would you wish for? Every kid I know that finally the light bulb went off, they say, I know what the answer to that. I'd wish for 10 wishes. And then every time I got to the 9th, I'd wish for 10 more. And that same kind of enlightenment, I'd say to you, okay, what's my most important invention? First, because first is nothing more than a way to scale up the ability for the world to have way more inventors. We now have a global community of young inventors, kids that are on first team, see the power of technology. They use that combination, as we spoke, of their imagination, which kids have a fantastic amount of, with the tools they're starting to get comfortable with in the world of technology and engineering. And when you put imagination and those kinds of powerful tools together, you invent the future. So what's my most important invention? First, because it will make an army of millions of inventors. I think people your age right now, in 10 or 20 years, maybe standing in front of a global audience, maybe in Stockholm receiving a Nobel Prize, and they'll be asked, what made you do this? And they'll think, well, that's complicated. I don't really know. People develop because of all sorts of things, their parents, But I do remember when I was a kid, I got involved in this thing called FIRST. And that gave me a sense of the power of technology. And then I got excited and I became part of a community of like-minded people. And I just got hooked and I never let go. And it caused me to study this in college and then do this. And here I am. Because what I did helped me cure cancer or helped me do this or that. So I think the most significant long-term impact of anything I've done will be that there will be, for generations to come, a larger and larger group of new inventors coming along that we helped create.
I really love that because that just really resonated with me, my experience first, and it just like really just highlights like how important it is for so many kids around the world. And it's not just like the program has been around for like 30 years now, so it's not just like, oh, it's a new thing. It's like this is now like a long lasting impact that you're going to see the effects of for years to come.
Yep.
Speaking of effects in our community, this next question comes from Team Sri Lanka, and they are saying, First Global has connected youth from all over the world, given them opportunities to express their creativity, things that we've touched on so far, and really inspire a love for STEM, a passion for STEM for the rest of their lives. How can the youth of developing countries, so you mentioned earlier, like there are some of the more countries that which have more established FIRST programs, how can youth in developing countries elevate their communities and really stress the importance of STEM through creating FIRST programs locally? Do you have any tips or tricks or advice?
So I think my advice is that the most powerful tool that FIRST has to keep growing and affecting more and more kids that frankly in the developing world are even in more need of access to and understanding of STEM, by far the most powerful tool we have is our army of existing kids and the alums. You know, FIRST is not a big global corporation. We don't have billions of dollars for doing television ads. We don't have billions of dollars to put infrastructure and any kind of stores around the world. We are a grassroots connection of the right kind of people that share the right kind of vision around the world. And the good news is it first is a self-selection process. The kids, the parents, the teachers, the mentors, the sponsors, the political leaders, the government people that get involved in FIRST, I think, all do it for the right reason. It's not because they're going to make a quick buck. Nobody makes money here. It's a not-for-profit. It's not because that you have to, you know, why is it when you go to a FIRST event, it just seems like a love fest of technology? Kids on competing teams that have robots that are beating each other up. Those robots are beating each other up, but the kids on the opposing teams are sharing parts and ideas and hugging each other. It's, if your question is, how do we get support for and more growth in developing world countries, I'd say, A, because it's a labor of love, because it doesn't take a lot of infrastructure, a lot of resources, it can just grow as long as there are people that care enough to grow it. And we have such a great mixture in the FIRST community of people of every generation, the kids, their parents, the teachers, everybody's in it for the same reason. Everybody pours their heart and soul into it, and everybody gets more out of it than they put into it. So if this was something that was enormously expensive to do and you needed enormous infrastructure and there were big companies taking things out of it, it might be harder to grow in the developing world than in many rich little communities. But FIRST isn't about that. So I think if the FIRST community is going to continue to reach out and be a grassroots organization, it will affect more and more developing countries more and more quickly. The proof that First Global in only 3 years has teams in 190 countries says a lot about the ability of First to reach the developing world. We had teams from every single one of the 54 countries in Africa. And it's not because we had a lot of money and a lot of marketing and a lot of capability to go to support them. It's exactly the opposite. We had the passion of kids around the world and parents around the world and teachers around the world and government agencies and foundations that said, this is a good thing. We've got to get it to the kids that need it most all over the world, and it's going to happen.
Fantastic, truly. With the youth kind of like driving, that community building, they're bringing STEM to different parts of their community. Developing countries are not are already developed rather. But what about the youth who try to create societal change? So Team Eritrea says it can be really daunting for youth to try and like tackle issues in their societies. We talked about climate change, we talked about STEM education, we talked about political change in a way too. What would you say to those who are discouraged by an overwhelming sense of insignificance as they try to create change and promote a better future?
So if you have students that see insurmountable problems around them, they don't have resources. In some cases, forget that they don't have the sophisticated technology resources. I am very, very aware that there are many kids that get up every day around the world and they don't have basic needs like clean water, or they don't have basic rights like security. I understand that those are realistic problems. And I certainly don't have all the solutions. But I would continue to point out that, and I joke with some people that the bigger the problem, the easier it is to move in a positive way. I mean, you could take that statement, every problem represents an opportunity, and turn that into, wow, First Global is surrounded by insurmountable opportunity. I think that the First community needs to focus on making sure that it is realistic for kids that have extra difficult environments to get some extra support. And I think in those environments where kids might feel overwhelmed or frustrated, we should just say to them, look, you got to take it, one step at a time. We're going to connect you not just with these kits to build robots, but we're going to connect you to kids and organizations around the world that can really help. They can help in a lot of ways. I mean, again, one of the lines I've been quoted as, I think, year after year making the same statement, we are not using kids to build robots. We're using robots to build kids. So you could go to some of these developing countries where they'll say, I don't know how to build a robot. I don't have this. They don't have electricity to run the thing. They don't have lights at night so that they can't work as long and as effectively as some of the other kids around the world. But the answer is that's all fine, because it's never been about the robots. And for those kids that might feel overwhelmed, I'd say, yeah, but just get involved, and any little progress you make will be incrementally a big change and a big move, and you'll see that you can accelerate into a new and a better place by being part of the First Global community.
Wow. Amazing. Like, that's so true. It just shows like the impact isn't just STEM, it's holistic for these students. It surpasses just the fact that they're like, getting the tools that they need to create innovation, but it's also like you're building the core of new leaders of the future. I think our last question for our Q&A comes from Team Serbia. How would you describe First Global in 3 words?
How would I describe First Global in 3 words? I think you just did it when you talked about global. I guess 3 words for what First Global is. Connecting future leaders. I believe that if you can connect kids at an early age around the world and give them some, while they all have different languages, different cultures, different geographies, there's one thing that's pretty much the same everywhere: the laws of nature. Newton's laws and electricity and magnetism. I think these kids, when they start in first and they realize 2 things that are very common compared to everything else that's very different, like their culture, their language. The 2 things they have in common: all the global issues, global warming, food, water, they all have the same issues: security, healthcare. The other thing they realize when they start working together is mathematics and physics and the laws of nature and engineering are all the same. So if these kids can develop a common understanding of their problem and a common language of mathematics and physics and engineering and problem solving, I think they can still and should always go back to their own traditions and their own languages and their own communities and their own cultures, but they can stay connected and create a global network of people that will use technology as a tool, not a weapon. They'll use technology as a way to come together, not to be divided. They'll use technology and their relationship with each other that we're developing at a young age to realize that we're all in this together, and they're either all going to succeed together or they're all going to race themselves to the bottom together. And so I think first is about connecting future leaders.
3 really powerful words, for sure, especially when you put them together. With that, we actually conclude today's STEM Talk and interview. Thank you, Dean, for taking the time to talk with us. I think this has been a really great session in terms of really showing students that this is more than just robots. STEM education through FIRST is obviously a huge part of it. It's part of our mission. It's part of our vision of the organization, and First Global especially, spreading that around the world. But really, like, it's about bringing a community together and really driving the future of how can we make the world a better place and empowering those who will eventually be doing it in future years to come. Dean, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with us for those of us who are watching?
I just want to thank you and the tiny little staff. You know, there's 8 billion people on this planet, 8,000 million people, and you're a tiny, tiny handful of them that are having an impact already in shaping the future. So I want to thank the little staff that's doing this Herculean work. And I want to thank all of the FIRST community around the world for helping us make it louder. And I want to ask all of you, especially in these difficult times of the COVID virus and all the stresses it's putting on every aspect of life, I want to ask you to redouble your efforts to make sure that the FIRST community gets even tighter and more effective in spreading our message and our mission around the world.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for our next STEM Talk. Thanks.
Good luck.